Commission meeting. Welcome. For the record, everyone on the commission is here. Thank you. The first item on our agenda is discussion and possible action awarding proposal for the development of a lead service line replacement program. I think I'll hand it over to you, Eric.
Thanks, Mayor. At the last meeting last week, it was asked to provide some additional information, so went back to Clark Dietz. They have provided a table of contents and a cost breakdown that they used for their proposal. And then there were also some questions about, really what they're going to provide for a deliverable. And then also there was questions about the communications and CDM Smith actually has public relations personnel on staff, and that's who they would be using. It wouldn't be the engineers themselves that are working on the actual plan. They have a wide variety, and they were included in their proposal as well for their bios and their backgrounds. And so staff's recommendation is to move ahead and awarding to Clark Dietz. But if there's any questions on the information, additional information.
Looks like we have a question from Mr. Force.
I do have a question on the communications part, which I think I share with John and others on this board, that's a very critical component going forward. You mentioned CDM Smith having public relations expertise. Where are those people, and would there be anyone here on site from that firm who is a communications specialist? And the second point would be, I would encourage some kind of a collaboration between whatever public relations and public outreach capabilities CDM Smith brings to the table, along with a representative or two from the city or from the water board, just to make sure that the communications are relevant to this community and are responding to the communication needs of this community. So two questions there. Where are those folks, and could we have some collaboration with local capabilities?
Yeah, I think the staff, at least the way it looks in the proposal, there's two individuals that they put in for public outreach, and they are both located in Illinois. Mm-hmm. So they would not be here, on a consistent basis. But there are some meetings that would be, and then we can obviously do WebEx and stuff as well with that. I think your point's well taken, Jim, that the communication plan has to be tailored to Wausau,
Exactly.
and not and not some cookie cutter. And I think that I think staff working with some professionals in that field, which these would be, I think we could customize a plan. If there are any commission members that want to be part of that on those kickoff meetings and those, I can just keep everybody informed. And if you're available and want to be a part of, please join in. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions or comments, Mr. G? And then Mr. Robinson.
The inventory of the lead service lines.
Yes.
Other than coming up with a fairly representative number, what does the EPA require, or DNR require more details regarding that process?
From what I've read is that we have to come up with the numbers that we have now, but we also need a plan on how we improve those numbers, because we're going to have a wide variety of numbers that are estimates at this point, and that will be satisfactory in the interim as long as we have a plan on how we identify, moving into the future for actual compliance dates, improving those numbers and identifying how that's going to be, and whether that's part of the communication plan where the first step will be sending out communications to homeowners and asking them to the process on how to look and take pictures and send them back to us. And that would be one step into that and how we do that. The next step might be, again, during the meter changeouts as we're doing that. And there might be some other ways to do that as well with public outreach that could help out, and how CDM Smith and Clark Dietz have done this in other communities as well to benefit, which would be part of the communication plan as well.
Previously, that was a potential change order. Is this part of what we're going to approve today or not?
I don't know the details on what they would use if they're planning on using a predictive software for that additional 20,000, you know? And at this point, I couldn't tell you whether we absolutely need that. I think
Okay.
if we get into a communication plan and identify how we identify our inventory, and then moving forward, if we feel that would be a benefit, could bring that back to the commission
Okay.
for the future, and have more details on exactly what that would entail.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Robinson?
Well, I want to reiterate what Jim had raised, and I just tried to do some analysis. It appears as if the total proposal from Clark is for 542 hours, of which 146 are dedicated to the inventory.
Can you pull your mic down a little?
So when you look at that, there's 396 hours dedicated to the report, compared to the other proposal of 482. In terms of communication specialists and/or outreach, Clark Dietz is 32 hours in there and 76 compared to the alternative. So this is a policy, a practice that's going to really be dependent upon how we work with the public. Quite honestly, I've not necessarily been impressed with what we've seen on the solar array. Putting, my personal observations on the table. So I understand that the desire is to go with the areas of expertise, but those people have worked with much larger systems in different parts of the country, and I'm not totally convinced that a lot of that is relative and transferable to Wausau. And I am concerned in the difference. If you take out the 20,000 for the material inventory, there's still a $20,000 difference between the two proposals.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we need to manage it. We need to take out the development of the ordinance. And I think monitor it and make sure that we're getting the right people. I don't know that we need, if the desire is to develop a communications plan and a strategy, I think that it's imperative that we get the right people involved in that process. And, again, I'll just ask the question, do we know what expectations each of the firms has upon you and your staff? And whether or not you are going to have the ability to meet those expectations in the development of this plan?
Yes, I believe that we will. We're going to be involved in basically all the divisions within Public Works, from inspections to GIS to the utilities to engineering. And so we will all have a piece of this. This isn't just utility work. So, but I do feel that we will be able to meet the expectations and what we have to provide. But definitely we need their expertise to put together a plan. We definitely would not be able to do this on our own.
And do we have any corresponding cost savings if we develop that local ordinance? Did they give you any number on that?
No, this is what they gave us. I asked them, whatever their total cost was. And so they did not provide us any feedback that there would be any cost savings as far as us developing the ordinance or otherwise. Yep.
Maybe this is a point of order or
Yeah,
something?
the meeting is not being, I see you're on there, but it's not working here. So it's,
We just had this. Yeah.
All right, well,
We're gonna-
technical difficulties.
Yes, we'll just be a second,
Okay.
in case anybody's called in or. What's the number?
Yeah, maybe Clark Dietz will be on and they can
It looked
answer
like they
those
were-
questions too, John. Oh, I think that we would need this plan done before the end of '22 and approved by the DNR. Yeah.
Why did you run in my back end?
No,
Okay, then she just needs to start it. Oh, it's good. Everyone can hear us? It looks like maybe she didn't start it yet. Yeah, well, we can't connect to the audio yet, so it makes me think the meeting's not actually started. Yeah.
My cousin contacted Debbie and she said, we fucking the money. First thing they thought I'd do a kind of
I know.
Hey Nate, can I ask you a question? Hi.
Hi there, this is Tanya Westfall.
Hey, Tanya.
Amaru and Matt should be on as well.
Yep, we're here. Good afternoon, everyone.
We'll just get started here in 1 second. All right. Welcome, everybody on the phone and online. You have called in to the Wausau Waterworks Commission meeting. It is Thursday, October 14th, 2021, and now it's 12:52. We had a little technical difficulty, but lucky for you, we are only on item number 1, so we will continue discussing this item. I don't know if we want to, if there are some questions we'd like addressed right away. Now that we know we have folks from Clark Dietz on, I would welcome those. Mr. Robinson.
You know, I have a specific question relative to if we're doing the ordinance development, what sort of reduction could we see in the contract for associated with that work? 'Cause that was in the original scope as a task, and I think the commission has made the decision that the city would do the development of the ordinance.
Yeah, I think I'd probably refer that to either Tanya or Amru with Clark Dietz and CDM Smith to answer that, if you would.
You haven't muted it.
Tanya, did you want me to jump in, or you want to take the lead on
Go
this
ahead.
one?
No,
Okay.
you go ahead.
So, yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to answer your questions. So with regard to the ordinances, our effort includes essentially identifying ordinances that you may want to consider to achieve public consensus and to encourage participation in a lead service line replacement program. We're not attorneys, so this does not include essentially writing up the ordinance, but certainly included in our scope recommendations for what ordinances you may want to consider, such as mandatory replacements of lead service lines during capital projects, or mandatory replacement when it comes to leaks and breaks. So we're providing input on these things, but essentially drafting the ordinances, that we would have to defer to the city attorney or essentially the commission attorney to write up the specifics of the ordinances. So does that make sense?
So if we don't want you to do that because there's readily available on the internet and through the DNR copies of other communities' ordinances that we can capture without utilizing your services, what savings would we see if we excluded that task?
We can certainly look at it. I mean, I don't think this was going to be more than 2 hours to identify the list of these ordinances. This was not a substantial task, as we provided in the breakdown of hours. But we can certainly look at it again if you would like us to.
Okay, thank you. Other questions or comments?
And again, they weren't on, but one of the concerns that I have is relative to, and picking up on Jim's earlier comments, the community outreach and public participation. The penitentiary has 76 hours in there compared to 32, and it's critical that we engage public engagement and have outreach. There's a more than doubling of hours in effort relative to that. How do you see your public relations or community outreach people engaged in this process? At what roles or in what capacities, and how will you be engaging others?
Yeah, happy to jump in as well. Again, this is Amru, CDM Smith. Very good question. It's a question we get from a lot of communities. So this is the replacement plan. It's not going to be we're not yet into the kind of the implementation, boots on the ground, engaging the residents. So in the replacement plan, there is going to be an effort to develop a kind of a communication and outreach strategy. And it starts with sitting down with the stakeholders, working with you to identify the stakeholders within the community, bringing those into a workshop, and identifying the best strategy to reach to the residents. So this could be development of flyers or FAQs. It could be, it might recommend, hosting town hall meetings, library events, but it's sort of outlining what is the most effective method that works specific to your community. So we're not going to take a communication plan that we've developed for another community and just change the name. That's not what we're doing here. We're going to be sitting down with the stakeholders that have communicated on other infrastructure projects over the years and have been able to communicate these things to understand what's worked well, what has not worked well, and then developing a strategy that over the implementation period can be implemented to encourage participation. In addition to that, we typically include kind of an implementation plan. So if you're planning to start implementing lead service line replacements in 2022, well, how much time do you need to develop the different activities, what duration, what resources you might need, what partners might you engage? It's sort of giving you a roadmap to achieve the goals that we've outlined with you.
Does that answer what you were looking for? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments or clarification needed? Mr. Force?
I don't fully understand why one proposal has the lead service line inventory in there at 20,000 plus, and the other proposal does not. And I guess I would address Scott as to what kind of an inventory do we already have locally? And would this 20,000 simply be, to some degree, a repeat of what we've already done?
It wouldn't be a repeat, and that is what we alluded to earlier, I guess, and not everybody heard the conversation. We started following up on some of the lead service line inventory that we talked about at the last meeting. Right now, we're estimating probably 8,500 lead service lines in the city. Discussion with Joe, he said maybe we should hit assessments up. And I don't have the numbers in front of me because I gave them to Eric. There was, 10,600 and some?
We had 13,763 residential properties, and of that were built in 1970 or earlier, 10,327. So the majority of them. Yeah.
So that would be considered our starting number. So we would have to take that number, those addresses, and then start backing up to discern which ones are still lead and which ones are not. So we could overlay those with our records, which are honestly kind of spotty. So we would know which replacements were done on the city side. The issue we're going to run into is trying to find out what were done on the private side. We were never required to have that information before. I contacted Inspections. They have from 2015 forward on their Evolve program. So we would have to go in individually, or we could scan for lateral permits, but then go into each lateral permit individually and see what was actually done. Was it a full replacement on the homeowner side? Was it a partial patch? Was it just a meter being brought out of the pit? So that would have to be done manually to see which work was done there. Then we would have to go back into the rest of the records, each one to see if it was a patch, if it was done during street reconstruction, if it's a full replacement. So we'd have to, I guess, combine those two records to see which of those 10,000, whatever odd numbers, were still had any kind of portion of lead in it. Inspections records only do go back to 67, so we wouldn't have anything from, I believe, 1907 to 67 to reference on that. So we would still only have a partial record or an estimate, a guess. And to follow up on what the conversation was before, EPA's new rule, under the rule, anything that could possibly be lead is going to be considered lead if there's any kind of action that we need to take.
I think Amru might be able to highlight too what the inventory itself would include other than just numbers. Amru, if you have a feel for what the inventory would entail.
Yes, happy to do so. So again, the inventory it defines which of your services are lead, which are confirmed lead, which are unknown, and which services are made of other materials. This is both critical from the federal, meeting the federal requirements, but it's also critical for meeting state requirements of the DNR. And if you gave us an inventory today that has 0 unknowns and you've already identified all what's lead and what's not lead, then that effort would not be needed. But since there's still a fair amount of services that are unknown, we would recommend spending time in developing a strategy of how you would go about reducing the number that are unknown. And so part of this effort includes looking at not just utility records, but looking at building records, tax records, all the available desktop data that we could put together, looking at the historical plumbing requirements of when lead was no longer allowed, interviewing city staff, plumbers, et cetera, to collect all this information. That would then refine the inventory of what is unknown and what is lead. Then the next step would be developing strategies for some type of next steps for the water utility to take. So this may include field verification. It may include sending surveys to homeowners. It may include having the homeowner upload their information on a website. And the main reason why you want to improve the inventory and the accuracy of the inventory is going to be largely linked to funding that you would receive both at the federal and the state level. For example, if a community has 5,000 lead services and half of them are unknown, they're not going to be able to get the same amount of funding as versus a community that has 5,000 lead services with 90% of them confirmed to be lead versus 50% of them being sort of unknown. So improving the inventory is going to improve your odds of getting funding, and it's also going to reduce the number of replacements should the trigger limit of 10 parts per billion be exceeded. You'll have to, under a mandatory requirement, replace 3% per year. And that 3% includes both lead and unknown. So it both has kind of a regulatory implication and a funding implication. That's why we would recommend developing a plan that's specific on a more accurate inventory. But again, if that's something that you do not want to include as part of this and wish to be added later, that's perfectly fine. We can amend this later if you want us to help with the inventory. Or if you want to hand us an inventory and say, this is the inventory, we want you to develop a plan based on this inventory, we're happy to include that. But we just think that the two are always connected from the other projects we've completed around the country. Developing a plan goes hand in hand with refining the inventory.
Does that answer the question you were asking?
Yes, I can see the value of that. It's such a big chunk of their proposal. I guess that's why I'm asking the question about the 20,000. I notice in the other proposal, it states that the firm will develop a strategy to, the firm will assess current lead service line inventory and identify areas where unknown service lines exist. Now, there's no detail as to how that's supposed to be done. Later on, it says, equip the city with tools, systems, and software to complete the lead service line inventory and track data. I don't know what those tools would be. I'm just trying to determine whether that $20,000 is something we need to spend.
Yeah, Mr. Jean.
Well, I also have problems with it too, because I don't know how anybody knows they're unknown. If they're built And actually, the year that I always remember when I was still working, it was 65, 66. So I don't know how much that would change. But the number you said, Scott, seems to ring true. I thought it was always around 10,000, maybe on our side. Obviously, so how do we know the unknown? I'd assume the worst. And when we do the ordinance, and we're going to make somebody replace it, then we have to know for sure, because we would be out of bounds with regard to the ordinance. So likely, that process is going to take place. As you say, we believe you have a lead service, and we are at a point where we're asking you by orders to replace it. And the only way we're going to know, we're going to go in that house. You can do all the computer work you want, but if I was a property owner, come on in and show me that it is lead. And that means every house. So I would rather we dropped it out, and if somebody can convince me later on that it's essential, I'd be happy to put it back in.
Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. I don't know if you'd like to respond on the phone, or if there's any more we should.
So, Joe, are you saying that irrespective of whether we spend X amount of dollars on a lead service line inventory, somebody is still going to have to go house to house to house to confirm?
Unless Scott can tell me some other way that we could, I think that's the only way, and I don't think these numbers are going to do that.
No.
I know it's a lot. But
That's the only way to absolutely be sure. And actually going in the houses doesn't always come to that absolute, to be sure conclusion. There's been meters that have been taken out of the pit that have come up through copper, and there's still going to be some legwork ongoing. We're going to have to do some hydro excavating, and it's going to be a long process to get to 100% surety on each service. But I think, looking at it from a different perspective, the $20,000, if we find the identity of 4 more services that we didn't know, and it saves us a change out on those services, it paid for itself. So I think there is some value to having better numbers than what we have, but to answer your question, if it's 100% surety we're looking for, they're going to have to be looked at.
Okay. Any more comments, questions? No?
I mean, from a staff perspective, if the commission isn't comfortable yet on, on the additional 20,000 for the inventory, we can absolutely bring that back with, if there's any specific reasons why staff would feel like it would be absolutely necessary to do, in a less timely manner than us doing it. But as Scott said, I think that with the inventory and absolutely having 100%, each one will have to be physically looked at. And that may be inside, getting in the home, and it might also be through hydro excavating as well. So,
Okay, so do I have a motion on anything? Or is there some work that you'd like to see done and returned? I would welcome.
to move this along, I'll move to adopt this plan, less the inventory for the time being.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt the plan minus the inventory.
I'll second that motion.
I have a second by Herbst. Yeah, Mr. Robinson.
For clarification, that's the Clark Dietz plan?
I'm assuming you meant the Clark Dietz plan as opposed to a different one?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yes. Any other questions or comments? Okay, all of those in favor of awarding the proposal to Clark Dietz and giving a little bit more thought to that inventory can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, next up, so I'm guessing we'll see that back again, so thank you. Next up is item number 2, discussion and possible action on the purchase of trucks and trailers for hauling Class A biosolids. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I can
Okay.
introduce it. So, at the last meeting, we had the option to, that was available to us to purchase 2 used, quad axle trucks. Each would carry 18 cubic yards, to handle our new dry biosolids. We had reached out to Donahue to help prepare some additional information. Some of it is in your packet, and then we had some updated information that I had, was given this morning, and so that came in today, and the hard copies I put out, and Gina put a copy in the packet, possibly with that information. I think the challenges right now, we're not exactly sure what the best method of handling those is long-term. And so we did look at funding possibilities, and we do have an equipment replacement fund that we could purchase those trucks, but it's a $300,000 budget item. And with the unknowns at this point in time, I don't know that I can recommend to the commission that we move forward in that direction. But there will be some cost to us if we contract out the handling of the biosolids in the interim. And that way we can get a determination on what the volume will be that we're actually producing, and just really how the operation is working, and make a better determination and recommendation to the commission. And a lot of this we would more than likely contract out. And there's some costs in here from Donahue that had calculated some estimates for us. The landfill, if we brought it to the landfill, they would use it as alternative daily cover. So Melissa was pretty confident at that, so she's working closely with us, and we appreciate that, so that it could be brought over there at less cost to the city. And they find it as a beneficial use too. So I think that's a win-win. But on any of the numbers or the things that we're looking at currently that we'll continue to look at between now and spring, if any of the commission members had questions, Dave or I could answer those at this point in time.
Mr. Force?
So by contracting out, would we have some contractor come in and load the material and haul it away? And then we would pay a tipping fee at the landfill, hopefully the lower tipping fee if it's used as landfill cover.
That's correct. And right now, the contract hauler to landfill cost at $8 a cubic yard. Typically haulers will haul sand and stuff for $5 a cubic yard, but because we don't have hard costs from contractors yet, that cost was put up a little bit higher. But yes, the idea would be that whatever boxes we're using, whether they're roll-off boxes with harders or they're just 30-yard trailers from a contractor, they would come in and take it and then haul it out for us. Yep.
And one more question. How long do we expect it to be before the DNR approves Class A classification for these biosolids?
I don't know if a timeline's been given, Dave, or if you,
We'd gotten an email from the attorney and they postponed it a little bit. I think they were talking December. Does that sound right?
This December?
I believe so.
Well, that's not that far off.
Well, then we'd be,
no, you're talking about the discharge permit, but
Exactly.
I think Jim is
Class
asking
A.
about.
When will we get a Class A classification?
well, the discharge permit's part of that. We have to have it in our permit to do it. And then otherwise, I think it's just a matter of proving that we can meet the requirements. And that'll kind of depend on how many hiccups we have and when we can get that dryer started. So, yeah, that won't be as early as December, but we'll be trying in January and February to
Right.
produce that class.
So maybe the next 6 months.
I would think within the next 6
Okay.
months, certainly, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Jean?
The, working this 50,000, is it the contract hauler fee would be in the neighborhood of 50 to 51,000? Is that, what time frame was that utilized to develop that? I mean, that's, or is it 50,000 a month? Or something like that? You follow my question?
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think that is our annual cost.
Oh,
Yeah. So if we did it all year long for
Okay.
an annual cost. Yep.
well, hopefully we have an answer to that long before that.
That's correct, yeah. Yep.
Okay, so are we looking for anything, or?
Not on this one unless the
Okay.
commission wants, something
Just
different, I
making
guess,
sure.
than what we discussed, so,
Okay.
thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I think we're ready to move on to our final item, number 3, discussion and possible action, approving the recruitment and retention initiatives. I don't know who wants to go first, maybe our
Yeah.
Human Resources Director. That's kind of a presentation.
I can run really quick through the items that were considered by the Human Resources Committee on Monday. So the Human Resources Department did a study into the city's recruitment and retention needs, and the first thing we started off was looking at the current situation. So we identified the positions that are currently the hardest to fill, which are bus operator, firefighter, and equipment services mechanic. Those positions we have been unable to fill all of our vacancies all year. The equipment services mechanic position has benefited from a hiring bonus of $2,000. The other positions are union, so they were exempt from that bonus. The next thing we looked at was our turnover rate. The city's turnover, and we kind of talked about that a few meetings ago with this group too. Our turnover rates aren't currently suffering, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it couldn't serve to be improved. Citywide, the turnover jumped up in 2014 and it hasn't really come down. So I'd like to see us bring that number back down to where it was about a decade ago. For this particular group with utility positions, your recruitment numbers are staying pretty stagnant, but again, it is still something that I'd like to pay some attention to. The positions with the most turnover, we calculated it 2 different ways because of some kind of weaknesses in calculation, but I would say that the positions with the most turnover are street maintainer, property appraiser, bus operator, sewer maintainer, city clerk, and equipment services mechanic. So for the utilities, the position that you guys have on there that we're experiencing the most turnover in right now would be sewer maintainer. We conduct exit interviews for employees who resign because that is really the area that we're looking on focusing on turnover for. Our resignation numbers are creeping up, and so that's the category that I'd like to focus our efforts on. Obviously, people who we terminate, benefits aren't going to keep them because we ended the relationship, and retirements are at the end of a long career, so I don't really want to force people to stay in during their retirement by making the job too terribly attractive. So the most common reasons for resignation are relocation, which is pretty hard for us to battle through benefits. But money, benefits, and hours was the second most popular reason why people left. The third was they were hired away by one of our neighboring public service departments. And then lastly, things like culture was pretty popular as well. The same thing was pretty common response to our employee survey. The answers that we got over and over again were people were looking for an improvement in pay, benefits, and culture. So that's where we're focusing our recruitment and retention efforts on, those areas that were identified as most important to staff. We have done, the city in general has done a number of efforts to try to aid with recruitment. They're in your packet. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you guys are probably familiar with some of them. I talked about the sign-on bonus. We've increased some second shift differential and third shift differential, just increased by $1. We added a tool allowance. We revamped the utility mechanic incentive. Because the way that it was written, nobody qualified for it, so we made that more accessible to employees and better fitting our needs. There is a cost of living increase of 2% currently included in the 2022 budget. So that is still pending council approval, but that is something that is in the works and is already built into the budget. We're also, Human Resources Committee and Finance just approved fully funding option 3 of the wage study. So our more senior employees who qualify for that increase will see that next year as well, provided it passes with the budget. So, to the important stuff. What changes are we recommending? There's two different categories, things that we can do right away and things that have to be considered in next year's budget. For things that we're requesting be approved right away, the first is to allow new hires to borrow vacation time. In 2018, we removed the waiting period for vacations. Prior to that, you had to be here for 6 months before we'd even let you take any time off. We removed that, but employees still needed to accrue a balance before they could take time. What we're proposing is to allow employees to borrow up to a week of vacation time so that they could use paid vacation time sooner after hire without having to wait for their time off to accrue. The next thing that Human Resources Committee approved was increasing the amount of vacation time that individuals have. So we're looking at, right now, new hires start with 2 weeks of vacation. A pretty common request is for the end 3 personal holidays. A pretty common request is for that to get higher. So we're going to come forward with recommendations on how to increase that as well. The last thing is pay. Something that we can do immediately is temporarily remove steps 1 and 2 from the salary scale. So we would start recruiting at step 3, and any current employees who are currently on steps 1 or 2 would be moved to step 3. This would help us for both recruitment and retention. And they would be temporarily removed with the thought that in the next wage study, everything would be equalized. If market trends continue the way they are, we'll kind of see where that shakes out, but there's a decent possibility that the ranges will just be adjusted. Something that I glossed over a little bit with the cost of living increases that are included in the budget. Not only are employees going to get a 2% increase, but the salary scales will move up 2%. So it's not just a pay increase for employees, but it also increases the salary ranges themselves. Things that we are looking for to consider in the next budget, largely because of their costs. The first thing is, I mentioned culture was a pretty common issue that was brought up as part of the survey, and the Human Resources Department has a supplemental request in for the budget to do a culture survey. This is pretty similar to a process that the county's been using for approximately 4 years, I would say, 3-4 years. And that would give us a good idea of what our current culture looks like, as well as help us identify areas of needed improvement. The next item to be considered in the next budget year is to develop a training and development program that ideally will allow us to reduce minimum qualifications. We identified sewer maintainer as one of our hard-to-fill positions. In the last year and a half, we have eliminated over 50 candidates from that position alone because they don't hold a CDL. And so one of the things that I'd like to see is maybe we could get a CDL, where Eric and I are actually right after this meeting talking about the possibility of a CDL trainer position or a city trainer position, that we could ideally hire people who don't hold those certifications and train them through the process so that they can receive it. There are some new regulations that go into effect this coming February that we'll have to comply with, but I think that that would increase our candidate pools. That was also some feedback that we got during the survey, was people were looking for more development and advancement opportunities. And then the last thing that would be considered in next year's budget would be some additional pay adjustments. Common feedback that was received is that it takes employees too long to reach the midpoint of the salary range. So we're proposing 2 increases annually every 6 months until the midpoint of the range is reached. So employees would receive 6% increases for their first 3.5 to 4 years if they were hired at the minimum salary. Now that leaves out our employees who are above midpoint. And that was one of the issues that we had with the tiered approach to the last wage study, was that our more senior employees felt left behind. So another item to be considered in the next budget year would be a lump sum increase to employees who are above midpoint. It could be equivalent to a percentage, an additional COLA that those people would get. Because it is a lump sum increase, we can use single source funding for it, such as the, I'm blanking on the name,
ARPA?
not ARPA. I was gonna say CARES, that's not what we call it anymore. We could use ARPA funds potentially for that as well. So because it occurs one time, we have a little bit more flexibility for funding with that. So those are the items that went to the Human Resources Committee. All of the items that were recommended for immediate implementation were approved by the HR Committee, and they're expected to go to the Finance Committee and then Council, those that have fiscal impacts anyway. The items that were recommended as part of next year's budget, we're going to be presenting supplemental requests to the budget, and they'll be considered one by one throughout the city's budget process.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if there are any questions. I think this is exactly what we were looking for. Mr. Robinson?
So have you done a workup on the projected cost? The
Yes.
fiscal impact, so what is the cost?
So I have citywide fiscal impact and not specific to the utility. The finance department is working on dividing out the cost based on funding source. The immediate suspension of steps 1 and 2 costs less than $20,000, which is one of the reasons why I thought it was feasible as a budget modification this year. The 6-month step increases costs approximately $250,000.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Force?
I just want to compliment you and your department. I thought this was a very thorough and thoughtful report.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jean, I saw your hand go up.
In relation, and I don't know that you know the numbers offhand, but by eliminating step 1 and 2 for like the sewer maintainer, what does that mean in like cents or dollars per hour?
Sure. I think you guys are currently recruiting at about $18.33 for a starting salary, and this puts you up to like $19.45.
Well, just
It might even be 20.
Cronenwetter's having problem hiring people, and they're hiring at roughly at the same rate we are. The people that aren't having trouble hiring are hiring $2 to $3, $4 more than we're offering. So, but I appreciate the fact that I thought we had it in our program that if you didn't have a CDL, you had a certain period of time to get it. Apparently that has been removed.
The water department does that, but the sewer department does not currently have that. So the water department, I believe, gives it's either 6 or 9 months to receive, 12, nice. 12 months to get their CDL. For the sewer department, they have to have it at time of hire.
Well, I can appreciate that, but if you had 50 candidates, and I know we need people, and we need people with CDLs, but there's no reason why we can't have some flexibility there, unless I don't understand something, Dave.
Well, I believe that for the sewer, or the plant maintenance technician, I believe that there's a time to acquire that CDL, and it's not an immediate requirement.
For that position,
The
yes.
sewer crew, those guys are out in the street from day one, and so we don't really have reserve people that, I mean, they pretty much need to have that CDL. It's something maybe we have to look at as we come forward with these new requirements. And so especially when we get the trainer on board and look at how long it would take to get them from zero to go, I think it's something we have to keep looking at. But I think there's some good logic for the fact that those guys, in order to do their jobs, need to be able to drive the equipment. So,
I couldn't disagree, but don't we take pickups out there too? You don't need a CDL to drive a pickup. I know that most of the equipment obviously requires, I saw them working on Bridge Street today. There was a water tanker and a high-pressure sewer cleaner. I trust you have to have it for the water tanker also.
I believe that's right, yes.
But if we had ample, and I think that was used primarily for helping with traffic control, why wouldn't a pickup do that?
Depends on what they're doing. They don't always use it for that. They use it to flush the sewers.
No, I
But-
understand.
And then the other thing is, it is true, like locating, for example, pickup trucks don't need a CDL for that. But it's a pretty small crew, and there's 4 guys. And so we want to, relatively soon, we need to get them onto the on-call list so they can respond to things. And so once they're on that list, they have to be able to operate the jetter and would need the CDL. So there's a little bit of flexibility there, but not so much. But like I said, I agree that we need there's changes coming and we need to pay attention to that.
I'm hoping to, with a trainer on board, that will take a lot of the burden off of our already short-staffed departments from having to be training people to get their CDLs. Also, sewer had a number of retirements, and so for a long time, they were in a tipping point where they were so light that training was quite burdensome. So, but I'm hoping moving forward with a strong path in place that it's something we can make work.
Yeah, Mr. Jean.
Was there a position recently where, I don't know if it was sewer maintainer or if it was in the plant, that we were going to pay more, but we elected not to offer the job because it would get into the realm of somebody making, as a new hire, making more money. Is that correct?
That is something that happens. When I look at what we can pay people, I look at based on the salary scales and years of experience. And so with us getting rid of steps 1 and 2, step 3 will be the new starting point. And so then as you have more experience than we ask for, I can move you up. So if we have someone with 2 years more experience than we ask for, I'll approve and offer up to step 5. But there have been times where, because current incumbents who have been here for a couple of years came in with no experience, would be making less than this new hire, where the departments prefer to keep the pay lower than the current incumbents to avoid internal morale issues.
Is there any way that we can have some flexibility with fixing those salaries at the same time?
So right now, the city's pay procedures don't account for that. I'm hoping with the 6-month step improvements, what we'll find is that our new people will start moving up faster. It'll give us a lot more wiggle room, and also kind of account for some of those things.
Mr. Force.
Question, CDL stands for what, Dave?
Commercial driver's license.
Oh, all right. And how long does it take to get one of those normally? 6 weeks, 2 months?
Well, it takes a while.
Right now, under current rules, we can train new prospects, or they can go to the DMV, take a written test. After they have their temp licenses, they can drive with a CDL holder in the vehicle. So we're allowed some leeway for training that way. As of February 7th next year, there's going to be an outline curriculum. You're going to have a registered trainer. There's going to be a lot more requirements that are going to go into it. So it's going to be a longer program.
Okay.
In absence of having a city trainer or somebody available, the tech is offering a program. I think it's 12 weeks, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So there's going to be quite a...
Fairly rigorous then.
Correct.
Okay. One other question for the department and for the staff, I guess. Do we do any internships, either with students from the tech or even high school students for summer jobs? And is that a potential way of bringing people into the labor pool?
We don't currently do any internships or apprenticeships, but I actually was just talking with East High School, who has an applicant for a mechanic-type apprentice position. So we are in the process of attempting to revamp that program and start it up again. Some of our departments have been looking at that. The fire department is restarting internship programs. So we don't have anything going right now, but there are definitely things in the works.
It would seem like our secondary schools and our higher education institutions would be a good source of that. I'm also aware that other utilities successfully do that, and students who intern end up with full-time jobs.
I just want a full-throated support of the concept. I've been talking with the HR director about this. Madison has a pretty amazing apprenticeship program, and one of the things they do is they bring in people as high school students or young people, and then once they've done that for however long, six months, a year, they're offered a job, an LTE job. And then if they are good at that, you can be offered a full-time job with the city, it's a great model.
Right. Having been involved as a supervisor in those kinds of programs, it's not a snap of a finger.
Nope.
You need to supervise these people carefully with a a good plan, so.
A lot of development.
It does require some investment on the part of staff.
Yep. Mr. Jean, it looks like you have something to.
When I gave a little presentation to the HR committee, I understand that, and I think people are, well, I know the people I talk to in the city realize we do have, our salaries and wages are lower than they should be, and we need to fix that. And we need to show to the staff that we are working on that, and these are all good concepts, I'm not negative about that. But that process has to continue, so they see that we mean business about fixing this, and, because it's going to be, whenever you do the study, hopefully sooner than later, you're going to find out we've got holes, some bad holes, and you can't fix it budgetarily overnight. It's going to take time. So anything you can do every year between now and that happening will make it easier for implementation. Now, the county, at least in the papers, said they were looking at a 3% cost of living, and I didn't say that at the meeting the other night. Whether that holds up, I don't know, but I think we should be in step with whatever they're doing. And I know it's a budgetary issue, but we need to do that. And there's some creative ways that I know that we used to do it. We would say, we'll give you 3% now, and we'll give you 2% at the end of the year, because then it transfers over to the next budget year. But at least the employees know that there's something coming again. So I'll stop my preaching.
Well, and I know that we are envisioning the recommendations before you as kind of the first step. Eric and I have already kind of tabled a couple of things that we were talking about in preference of throwing our weight behind these things and then planning out a second rollout phase of some changes that we think could happen as well to support it. My hope when we do the next salary study would be to do a targeted study. So our last wage study, we used published survey results. And if we do a custom survey, we can identify who we think our equivalents are and which municipalities or employers we would like reached out to. And I think that will help fill some of those holes that we've identified since. And so I do think that will be a good step in the right direction. And I think Mary Ann's got some info on the COLA.
Finance director here to talk all things budget.
Sure. I think the city and county's pay plan is different. So the county works on just a pay for performance. So that 3% does not have regular step increases in it. So a high performing employee is going to get 3%, whereas the city has a step system. So if you're in the beginning up to the midpoint, it's a 3% increase a year, and then 1.5% once you're past midpoint. And then for the COLA, that would basically lift people below midpoint 5% and people above midpoint 4.5% this year. So it's very competitive to what the county's offering.
I'll back off of my comments.
I see Mr. Robinson was probably going to comment as,
But she covered it.
all right, perfect.
But I would just point out that the news today is that Social Security is increasing at 5.4, so anything we can do to offset that is probably a good thing.
Mr. Robinson.
Well, I think we need to temper this with the reality of, if you look at the 2014 decline or increase in turnover, I think that coincides probably strongly with probably the full implementation of Act 10 in other things. And I think from a culture perspective, it's been hard to react and respond given levy limits and the devaluing, I would say, of public employment that occurred as a result of that. And Dale Knapp, who works for Forward Analytics, has done some good work on how that's impacted education in migration into the state and the perceptions of others relative to the quality of education, which brought people back. But I think in the long term, we're dealing with a nationwide work shortage. So we have to be innovative. This challenges us to be inclusive and diverse and open for new ways. And I think that from a utilities commission, we can't be separate from the city. We have to walk hand in hand with what the city's policies are. And toward that end, I would move that we implement the changes that have been recommended consistent with city's policies, which would deal with step 1 and 2, deal with some of the adjustments to midpoint, deal with the vacations.
All right, I have a motion to follow the HR committee's recommendations, and I see I have a second from Mr. Force. Any further conversation about this? Okay, all of those in favor can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The last item on our agenda is move to adjourn.
Mayor, I do have a point I'd like to bring up before we adjourn.
Okay,
This has to do with the construction of the water plant on the,
so I think, so maybe we should adjourn the meeting first, and then if there's maybe an announcement after, I'm seeing my, not allowed. Okay,
I'll be brief. I had a complaint from a resident this morning about the entry road being constructed from the intersection of Campus Drive and Burrick. It appears to be going straight into the property and is very close to the residence of the person who brought it to my attention. That person lives at 1741 Burrick, and that's the last home to the north on Burrick. When I looked at the renderings and I looked at the site plan that we presented in our public meetings and also to the council, the entry road is further north. And actually, in the first site plan, that entry road is drawn where the old entry road into the gravel area was, which was quite a ways north of that person's residence.
so I'm sorry to interrupt. I think maybe this is something we could update the director of afterwards. There's definitely some concern about non-agendized items being discussed. So I would take a motion to adjourn.
You're breaking the law.
So we don't want to do that. A motion, I'll take that motion from Mr. Jean and a second by Ms. Herbst. We are officially adjourned. Thank you.
If the